Hello, Blenders, and welcome to episode number 286 of Real Blend, a podcast that costs less to produce than an episode of She-Hulk. My name is Sean O'Connell. I'm the managing director here at Cinema Blend and a co-host of the Real Blend podcast. And on this week's show, Sophia Coppola's new film, Priscilla, is going to hit theaters. We're going to chat about Five Nights at Freddy's, first off, winning the box office, and whether it has saved cinema as we know it. And David Yates is going to join us to talk about his new film, Pain Hustlers, which is available currently, as we speak, on Netflix, starring Emily Blunt and Chris Evans. A lot of show to get to this week. Let's start with the boys. I'm going to start with Jake Hamilton of Fox 32 in Chicago. Hello, Jacob. How are you, sir?
Hey, buddy. Look at my coffee mug.
What do you got there? Oh, that's awesome. Camp Crystal Lake.
Yeah.
I like it. Friday the 13th. It's November now, dude. It's time to...
Do you not think that Friday the 13th exists in the month of November?
We pay less attention to them.
Speak for yourself, sir.
It's time to move on. It's Thanksgiving. And we might actually set up Christmas this weekend. We like to jump way far
You're
ahead.
those people.
Yeah, we are those people. I know. But we're proudly those people. I like it. Kevin McCarthy of Fox 5 in Washington, D.C. is joining us as well, too. Kev, how are you, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I had my Christmas tree up through April of this year, I think it was. So I have
at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, why take it down?
No judgment whatsoever. I mean, the Mariah Carey video that was released today or yesterday, I think we're officially in the Christmas season, according to Mariah Carey.
Does she have a new song? Is that what the problem is?
Well, no, I think
does she have a new song? Why would she create a new song?
Well, I think she was just announcing that, you know, we are in the season.
And she's in a block of ice, and these people in Halloween masks are using hair blowers to melt the ice, and you hear that, and then when the ice melts, she sings the opening of All I Want for Christmas. And I think it just says like it's time.
Which already, by the way, has apparently broken back into the Billboard charts. And speaking of Billboard, shout out to Blink-182 for making number one on the Billboard 200, and read Sean's interview on Cinema Blend.
Both of y'all's interviews. So I'd like to share. Kevin, didn't yours do massive numbers on YouTube? Sean, yours was retweeted and shared by Tom himself. Like you guys did. I mean, the coolest part about this was seeing Kevin and Sean's success by interviewing Tom. Was how much it meant to you guys. I thought that was it's not just because I'm not trying to, this is going to come out worse than I intended, but like we've all have done interviews that like have done well, and it's like, okay, that's cool. Like I'm glad people enjoyed that. But like when you do an interview that means something to you, that has a substantial part and why we love what it is that we do, and then people connect with it, it does well, as it did with both Kevin and Sean's interviews. I mean, they both did insane, massive numbers. And I just think that's really cool that interview, it could have done 4 views and it still would have meant a lot to you guys. But the fact that it did the numbers that it did, I just thought that was really cool to see.
And also, like, you know, and thank you for saying that. And also what's interesting about, you know, we're a movie podcast. So the reason why Sean and I were both interviewing him, as we've said, it was for Monsters of California, which is available on demand if you haven't seen it. If you're a Blink fan or just, you know, sci-fi fan or Amblin fan, as Sean's article will tell you, it hits all those notes, and it's really interesting. And just, you know, as you said, Sean, you know, not many people have had a better October than Tom DeLonge with the release of the new album and his new movie, and his guitars are back in stock, which I'm excited about. So, and the
tour, they're going to tour all through next year. So
I got tickets.
Too. I'm excited. Yes, very excited. Let's say hi to Gabe Kovach before we move on with the program proper. Hello, Gabe. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. I'm wearing the most yellow hoodie I could find.
You know, what's interesting, Gabe? So I went to George Mason University. If you look at the screen, well, obviously, yeah, but like green and yellow are our colors. So you and I are basically a GMU advertisement right now. Shout out to Mason. Yeah. Well,
these are all the reasons why you should be watching us on YouTube.
Sean and I look like we did not go to college whatsoever.
We did not. I'm wearing, surprise, I'm wearing a Marvel t-shirt.
And Sean went to Marvel Cinematic University, right?
Oh,
I did.
MCU.
Well done.
Yeah. And we're in some trouble right now. If you listen to Variety, we're not going to dig into that. I kind of think that news is a little bit old, but
we all collectively do not agree with basically, if you're listening to this on Friday, there was a story that came out earlier this week that they're potentially thinking about reviving Downey Jr.'s Iron Man and Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow, which obviously they both died in Endgame. Spoiler alert. That we all collectively on our text thread today sent the article with just an enthusiastic no.
Yeah,
because
I'm curious how much of that was. That's the sort of thing that someone maybe says and it lasts half a second in a boardroom. Yeah. But then it hits a journalist and a journalist is like, well, I have to write about all of that. Like, because it's just the biggest idea ever. But it was like, oh, what if we brought them back? It's like, no, that would ruin. Like, it could just have been that in the room, but it's a story. That's how it goes.
Because honestly, my friend, like, God help if once the actor strike ends and Robert Downey Jr. has to start making the rounds on his Oscar campaign. God help the fact that every single report is going to go, so are you coming back? Like I feel like the are you coming back as Iron Man narrative just died down because he showed what he's capable of in Oppenheimer. Yeah. And of course, now it's just ramping back up.
Oh my God. We've said it on the show before, but these movies and these stories need stakes, and you cannot undo. But then again, we also argue that we're excited about Wolverine showing up in Deadpool 3, and apparently we saw.
Because it's a different Wolverine than Logan.
And Logan, apparently, from an article I read this week, I don't know who to give credit for to it, but Logan is canon apparently in this specific story. So it'll be interesting. But either way, I feel like a hypocrite. I'm excited about Wolverine, but I don't want to see Downey Jr. come back as Iron Man because his death was so poetic, and so was Wolverine's death, though. I don't know. Yeah.
We shall see. Yeah. If you're on YouTube, give us a like and a subscribe. Of course, we're available all the different places you can get your podcast needs met. And don't forget to sign up for Real Blend Premium if you want an ad-free version of the show and a newsletter this week, which I'm not quite sure I'm going to write about just yet, but an idea will come to me very, very soon.
I have an idea for you.
Oh, do you want to share it now, or do you want to?
Well, I'm just going to say you should write about AI in films, and because we saw the story the other day about President Biden watching Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, and that adding to the awareness of AI and how movies have the ability to give us awareness of real life situations, but maybe emotionally give us more depth to them. I think it's an interesting thing when we watch films. I learn a lot of history from watching movies. Not that movies are historically accurate, but I think at the end of the day, the beauty of a film is if you're immersed in it so much emotionally that a certain aspect of real life hits you in a different way and you walk out of that film thinking about life in a different way. That, not to say the movie was the reason why it makes you more aware of something, but it could give you the possibility of connecting to it on a different level. So I would just be interested from an article perspective of what real things in movies you've watched that have affected the way you feel in real life about things.
I can even bring in, I interviewed earlier this week, David Gann, who is the writer of Killers of the Flower Moon. And he talked at length about, he's mainly a historical writer, and how much he paid attention to the history side of that in helping them prepare for all the different things that were going on. You interviewed him? I did,
author?
yeah.
That's awesome. I would have loved to have interviewed him. Did you talk to him about The Wager?
Yeah, we talked a lot about The Wager, actually.
I haven't read that book. I'm dying to read it.
I just got it from the ebook borrowed from my library.
Which,
there you go.
Is it confirmed that that's Scorsese's next movie with DiCaprio? Is that just kind of floating around like that's the possibility? I read somewhere that I saw a quote from Scorsese that he might want to co-direct that.
Yes, because a lot of it has to take place at sea, apparently, and he's not ready to necessarily do that at
right.
80?
He's gonna ask Spielberg to do it. Just to be a jerk.
Well, and it was funny about what Sean is saying. There was a great quote from Scorsese about this and the possibility of co-directing and essentially the idea of being at sea. If you really want to understand why it's so hard to make movies at sea, watch the behind the scenes features on Dunkirk. Filming on boats it's a whole thing. I mean, I don't know what The Wager's about, but it's the whole process of shooting on water. It's amazing.
Well, we shall figure out if we're going to get to that film soon enough. But in the meantime, we have David Yates. David Yates, who has been extremely busy in the world of the Wizarding world, I guess is how they put it. And he directed 4 Harry Potter films and then 3 Fantastic Beasts films, and is finally breaking free from that universe to branch out into kind of a topic that we've seen in a few films already up to this point, which is the opioid crisis and fentanyl and these drugs that people can get through prescriptions that are written sort of haphazardly, and the people who push these types of pills and get doctors on board in order to write these scripts, and the staggering amounts of money that they make as a result of doing this. Peter Berg had a film earlier this year. We had Peter Berg on the show to discuss
series.
A series, right? Exactly. Yes. And his story went after more the effect of the drugs on the families and how it can tear people apart and really get them addicted to the pills. Painkillers
is Berg's series, and then Pain Hustlers is David Yates.
Pain Hustlers. God, thank you very much, Kevin, for clearing that up. Pain Hustlers, as you can tell from the title, is a little bit more focused on the people who are in the pharmaceutical sales side of it.
The racketeering, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Emily Blunt plays a person who gets into the sales side of it. Chris Evans is the guy who recruits her for it. But it was really interesting to hear what got him interested in this story and the different places that he went to film it, and getting away from the VFX and the green screen of the Wizard world to get back to shooting practically and getting a little bit back to his roots. And there's a really fascinating aspect of this interview that you guys will hear, where the day that we got David on the show, coincidentally, it was the day that they announced this documentary that Daniel Radcliffe is supporting about David Holmes, the stuntman who was injured on the set of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. And Daniel Radcliffe is doing a documentary that's going to HBO about this stuntman. He was a stuntman for Daniel Radcliffe throughout the Harry Potter series. So we got David's take on working with David Holmes and the day of the accident and the documentary. So I thought that was a really great bit of this conversation. So I'll let you guys hear it for yourself. This is David Yates, the director of Pain Hustlers, in addition to all of the work that he did in the wizarding world. We like to focus on the craft of filmmaking and get into the nuts and bolts of the process, but I kind of want to go with a bigger picture here because of something interesting that happens in Pain Hustlers. There's a moment in the story where Chris Evans gives Emily's character a shot at a time when she desperately needs it. She needs a break. She begs him essentially to take a chance. And I'm curious if you have someone that you can think of who kind of did that for you at any point in the process, who maybe opened a door into this community that might not normally have opened.
Do you know, it's so interesting you asked that question. Last night I went to an event, and it reminded me of the very first time when I came out of film school. Had my short film under my arm to take into the world, as you do, to say, here I am, everybody, give me a job. I'm a filmmaker. I've been at film school. And I wrote to a guy, he was a producer, he was called Paul Kerr. He worked at the BBC, and he produced a documentary show for the Beeb, which was called Moving Pictures. It was a really interesting show that covered all aspects of the film industry, and I loved it as a student at film school. So I literally, off the bat, I had my short film. I wrote to Paul. I said, I'd like to contribute a piece to your BBC program. Would you employ me? I'm just out of film school. And he brought me into his office and he sat me down and I pitched what I wanted to do. And he literally gave me my first job.
Wow.
And there was not, I'd not really done anything. And off I went, and I made a piece about low budget filmmaking in the UK for the BBC, and Paul was kind enough to support me and give me that break and open that door for me, which we all need at some point in our career. We all need someone to just place that bet on us, and Paul was the first one to do that for me.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
You know, David, I always find the relationship between the filmmaker and the composer to be fascinating. To me, obviously, with John Williams and the Harry Potter films, and then you look at James Newton Howard and Michael Dean Parsons here in terms of like what you're dealing with as a filmmaker. What are your conversations when you have two composers, and is that different than talking to one composer? And I guess a branch off that question, is there anything you learned in your process with John Williams on the Harry Potter films? I know he was on prior to you coming on as a filmmaker in the series, but you still worked with him. So it's an interesting thing to think about. Is there anything from there you still use? And then how does it work with two composers?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, on the Potters, I used a wonderful French composer called Alexander Desplat, who was a really gifted guy, and also a chap called Nick Cooper. So we used John Williams' key theme, which is iconic, of course, but I used two different composers on Potter for my 4 films. And you always have, now interestingly with Pain Hustlers, there were two composers. They're joined at the hip in this case. The two of them are working together anyway. And it's the same, you send the same note to both of them and you have conversations with the two of them. And they're working in partnership. And the reason the workload on Pain Hustlers was split was simply that they were doing other work at the same time. And I could have just gone, okay, you're that busy, I'll go somewhere else. But I love working with James, and so we figured out a way of making it work. And two heads are sometimes better than one. So it's a very collaborative, open process. And with the Potters, with Alexander Desplat and with Nick Cooper, you sit down, you watch the movie together, you talk about the emotional landscape, and you go through a cue sheet together to decide where the music could play best. And it's a story building process, and it's always enjoyable and it's always fun. And I love that part of our process. It's the music part of it is always quite exciting and thrilling when all these talented composers come up with something that really moves or excites you. But it's a constant dialogue. And James Newton Howard on the Beast films, he scored all three Beast films that I directed. He was like immense, mate. He would write 20, 30 different versions of each cue. He was non-stop for like a year. So he would do other things, but his engagement in the process would happen before I finished shooting the movies. And he just liked working like that. I like working like that with him. And we would build a dialogue up over a period of months and months and months. Whereas normally the traditional industrial model, which is very typical in our industry, is you lock picture, you've been doing the mix, and in comes the composer and writes the score in 6 weeks and you record it. It's a very tight framework. With these composers I've worked with, we take a slower burn. Alexander on Haller's Part 1 and Haller's Part 2 was a bit more in and out, because of his busy schedule. But with Nick Cooper and with James Newton Howard, I love this sort of long companionship that we would share as we evolved the work on the score.
Just a quick follow-up real fast, because I just heard James Newton Howard's new score for the Hunger Games movie yesterday, and for Francis Lawrence's film, and it's incredible. You said something interesting to me, because on the first Potter films, Columbus does the first two. I think Cuarón steps in for Azkaban, you take over, but John Williams starts it. So did you at all ever have contact with Williams in your time of making it, or was it specifically Desplat? And like how does that work when he starts the score?
Well, John came up with the iconic theme, the Potter theme, and then every single piece of music, Nick Cooper scored the first two and Alexander scored the second two. So I never had a conversation with John, but I had weeks and weeks of conversations with either Nick on the first two films and Alex on the second two films. And we used John's theme sparingly, and then there's hours of incidental music that was written around the drama that didn't include John's theme.
Gotcha.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting.
David, your editing in Pain Hustlers creates this tangible energy. It has a pace and an urgency of a sales call almost. And I think it's somewhat vital to the success of the story. And I'm wondering if you can just discuss your approach to editing here, and if, for any research purposes, did you go on any sales calls to maybe sit in? And because there's a lull of waiting, and then there's a hurry up and go pitch to it.
Very good. Yeah, we talked. Emily and I spoke to some farmer reps who had been on the ground doing the kind of things that we were presenting in the film, and that was quite instructive. But in terms of the editing pace, I just loved the idea that it could feel fairly exhilarating and in the moment, and we really embraced that energy and sort of the rhythmic quality of some of it. We enjoyed, Mark Day, my longtime editor, and I really enjoy that, the pace of it all and the speed of it. We thought it was quite fun to explore the story in that way.
David, I've been a fan of Colleen Atwood for years, and I've just always appreciated the brilliance of what she does with her costume designs and things like that. And I remember doing an interview a few years ago with Denzel Washington, and we're talking about little details of characters that kind of fit you into who that person is. And he goes, when I put a character's shoes on for this role, I found the character in that moment. I was like, really, shoes? And so I wanted to ask you your relationship working with Colleen Atwood, and kind of like, what different little aspects of the costume designs do you feel as a filmmaker bring those characters to life? Because it's a lot of different things. It's rehearsals, it's script, it's performance, and things like that. But I'm just curious what that relationship is like, and how you feel about costume design, and kind of how that plays into your narrative. Sure.
So I've worked with Colleen 4 times now. So we've and the next film I make, I want to use Colleen because there's no one quite like her. She's a sort of serious, she's the real deal. And what I love about Colleen is she's bold. She'll take swings at things which other costume designers might sort of hesitate at doing. And I love that about Colleen. There's a sort of expressiveness to her work, which is sort of, and I thought, actually, honestly, it's just that's kind of like we're in a wizarding world, so we can sort of be elaborate and playful. But no, when we get to the contemporary world, she's just as bold, just as vivid. And that's what I love about her. And absolutely, actors have told me that, similarly to what Denzel Washington said to you, once you start to find that costume that sort of expresses that human being that's on the page, it helps them land that human being in an authentic way. And it might even modify the shape of the character in some ways. It is remarkable what that process does. And what I love about costume is I like the fact that she is courageous and want to be vivid in terms of the work. And she always gives us brilliant silhouettes, actually, that look fantastic in the longer, wider frame. And poor Emily in Pain Hustlers had to wear so many different costumes, so many different costume changes. There was often 2 or 3 costume changes a day. By the end of the shoot, she was getting skin rash for the fact that she changed into another bloody costume. So, but we encourage that from Colleen because she's the top of the game, the best there is, I would say.
She's amazing. Her Sleepy Hollow work blows my mind every time I watch that. Oh,
yeah, totally. She is. Yeah, she's my first go-to now.
Well, there was something about Chris Evans's suits in this film that just made me not trust him. I don't know what it was.
No, that's perfect. That was a difficult brief, to just make Chris Evans not look trustworthy and good. And sort of like the sleeves and the trouser lengths, and the color scheme as well, just slightly off. Bad fitting suits, but somehow elegantly done. They
didn't fit him, right? They were too big on him, weren't they?
Yeah, deliberately. He went for bad fitting suits. And Colleen really embraced that. She loved doing that.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. All right. I would like to bring up the Matt Ellison character because in the film, it humanizes the story and gives us a snippet of a patient, who admits that they got a portion of their lives back, for a moment by using the pills. And I would assume in researching this movie that you could include 100, human stories like that. So I just wanted you to talk about when you chose to employ that and what you wanted to get across with the character like that.
For sure. We wanted to explore a victim of the crisis. I mean, there are several victims in the story, one of whom dies, a fictional character who is staying in the long stay motel, and he dies. But we also wanted to explore a more complex character who was complicit in their own relationship with drug use. But who overcame it and got through it. And we spoke to a lot of people who were dealing with victims of the crisis and families victims of the crisis. And they said, look, it's a complicated issue, this whole use of opioids. Some people really do need them genuinely. And one of the difficult things that's happened since sort of, the push to control how these opioids are prescribed is that there was a sudden push to constrain them, and there were some people who absolutely need them for pain management, and also with the Matt Allison character, there was a certain, he was very philosophical about his use of them. He actually quite enjoyed using them. They made his life easier for a while, but he got through using them. So it was really, we wanted to kind of present the audience with a character who, he wasn't just a victim. There was a more nuanced journey for him through his drug use. So, and he had a take on it, which felt to us authentic to some people's experience of using opioids. And we also serve the story of people who die, of course. And typically the pattern from this story, which is quite tragic, is the doctor who's prescribing would get the patient addicted, would then stop prescribing for whatever reason. Either they were arrested or for whatever reason the insurer would stop paying. Then the person who'd become addicted to the fentanyl would need more fentanyl, and they would typically go to the streets to get it cheaply. But sometimes the source of that fentanyl was bad, and they would easily overdose without realizing they would die. So that's the sort of typical pattern of what would happen. That's why the death rate was so high. And we wanted to honor that with Matt. Matt ultimately wanted to take the drugs, was enjoying taking the drugs, but ultimately got through taking the drugs. And that was that particular story.
David, we have a third co-host on our show who wasn't able to be here today due to a scheduling conflict, and he sent us a question, which I really want to hear your answer to this, because I'm fascinated. Because in the past couple of days, the story came out about David Holmes and the documentary that Daniel Radcliffe is putting. Yes. And Daniel Radcliffe is, for people who don't know, Daniel Radcliffe's stunt double on Deathly Hallows was paralyzed. And there's a whole documentary coming out where Daniel Radcliffe's going to be in the documentary with David Holmes. I'm just curious your perspective on that. I didn't know this story. I don't even remember if this was ever, I think maybe it came out in Tom Felton's book, I think it was. But what was your perspective on that story? And do you remember the day? I'm assuming you do, but just what are your memories of that particular story? I didn't know this.
Oh gosh, yeah. David is an extraordinary man and a graceful, bright, and he was very loved, in the community. And he was an amazing stuntman that sort of being a stuntman is an extraordinary job. And the people who do that generally are very committed. It takes years and years and years to train. You have to go through so many hoops and different disciplines, horse riding, swimming, gymnastics. It's a real trial to even get admitted into the union to be able to do stunts.
Oh wow!
And David was was basically Dan's stunt double, and there was a terrible accident. I was on the main unit. This was on the second unit, stunt unit on the day. So I heard that it had happened, and it was a wire pull, something that we did often. And Greg Powell, who was involved, who was sort of the stunt wrangler, if you like. He sort of did all of the stunts, was with David when it happened. And I heard about it happening on a walkie-talkie, and David was rushed to hospital. And so, he was paralyzed after this terrible accident, and has kind of navigated a way through that with extraordinary, it's been really, really difficult. And, Daniel has always been close to him, to David, and has always supported him and been a good friend to him throughout those movies and subsequently. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the documentary. I think it'll be a hard watch, but and David, in my experience, I've spoken to him 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years, and he came to the music recording on the last Beast film, and he's just a really graceful, wise soul who's dealt with this tragic accident with such, I know it's not been easy for him, and he's had some real ups and downs. But he's dealt with it in a really sort of inspiring way, I think, even though I know it's not been easy for him. But he's a remarkable man, and I'm sure the documentary is going to be not just a homage to him, but also to that profession and the risks that they take for us to entertain us, to help us build our stories. We ask a lot of them, and the health and safety protocols generally are really good and effective, but occasionally things go wrong. And they're not, we all do our very best to make sure those standards are maintained. But on this particular day, it was the timing of the pool and the sort of communication between Greg and Dave. I'm not absolutely sure quite how but we changed all our stunts after that. It's horrible what happened to David, and I'm looking forward to seeing the documentary.
Well, and it's not, there's obviously the idea of an Oscar is somewhat hollow, but we all keep arguing that there should be some recognition, for the work that goes into that union and on those films. And so I hope that there's some change on that side as well too.
I agree. And I think I'm not sure I know I've heard that said often, that why aren't we recognizing what these people do for us? It's enormous. It's an enormous contribution. And so I think it's worth, I should check in with that. Without that.
Before we run out of time, David, I'll get you out of here on this one. I was lucky enough to come to one of your sets at Leavesden, and then tour the Potter museum that's there, and it's just an incredible.
The dining hall is unbelievable. It's so cool,
unreal. And so. I've seen sets, like legitimate sets of yours, that are built out to scale. And so but still with the Wizarding World, you're utilizing the best visual effects that are available. But I just want to talk to you about if it was freeing with Pain Hustlers to tell a story that didn't require, that amount of crap. Not that there probably aren't some visual effects sprinkled throughout it, and I'm sure they're invisible to our eye, but can it become easy to be reliant on those tools, and say we'll punch it up in post, or we'll fix that later, versus having to maybe run and gun and shoot what you got for Pain Hustlers?
I loved the fact that on Pain Hustlers, I could basically pan my camera anywhere in the landscape and everything was real and sort of in camera. And that's exactly what I would do. Before making all the films in Potter and Beasts, I was very much earthed in real landscapes, real locations, real spaces. And so for me, it was liberating and fun to go back to that opportunity to just be able to film whatever you liked, pretty much, and not feel it needed to be composited in later, or a green screen here, a green screen there. Obviously, those worlds, the Potter and Beast worlds, they require a level of design. Stuart Craig, obviously the architect of all of that. And it's wonderful. The museum is a real testament to that group of artists that I work with to create those sets and those spaces. And that in itself is a joy. The architecture and sort of exploring what can be done with visual effects and set building and scenic work. But you can't beat being in a real world environment and being able to film what the hell you like. And be inspired by the real world, be inspired by a building or a piece of furniture, For me, it made a real change. It was fun.
Amazing.
Well, David, we want to say thank you so much for joining us. We are, this podcast was created years ago specifically to talk about the craft and the filmmaking and score and composition and everything, costume design. So thank you for being on and taking us behind the scenes of your world and how you make your films. We'd love to get you back on again in the future. And thank you for all that you've contributed to cinema. It's been, you've obviously been a part of everyone's lives for a long time. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to see you both.
Thank you so much, as always, to David Yates and our good friends at Netflix for helping set up this interview. I would definitely recommend throwing Pain Hustlers on if you guys want to see a really great performance by both Chris Evans and Emily Blunt. I like them a lot in it. There was an aspect of Peter Berg's story, Painkillers, that I found somewhat interesting.
It's just Painkiller, sorry, not
Painkiller,
to make it even more confusing.
That he glanced over. He mentioned it, but kind of glanced over it, which is these extremely attractive pharmaceutical sales reps that have to go into doctors' offices and almost flirt their way into an appointment with the doctor in order to get this doctor to sort of come over and write prescriptions, because the moment that you get them writing prescriptions, the idea is the patients get so addicted to the pills that they can't stop coming back. And then the pharmaceutical reps make a ton of money. That was a small part of Peter Berg's story. This was the main focus of David Yates' story. The big issue that I want to bring up, and it's going to tie into a couple of other films right now, is that these Netflix films have no shelf life, like zero shelf life at all. I just pulled up Netflix today, like earlier today, before we were filming, to verify if Pain Hustlers had been released yet even. And it's nowhere on the main menu at all. And I had search under Pain Hustlers, and then it came up on the search and it had a little 10 down the bottom to signify that it was the 10th highest, watched movie of the day or whatever. But if you don't actively know that these movies are coming, and to that end, like, there's a David Fincher movie.
That's what I wanted to say, dude. There's a David Fincher movie in theaters right now.
Yes, and
I haven't seen it. Have you guys seen it?
No, have not.
I'm seeing it Saturday at 1 o'clock.
I was going to try to go this weekend and go see it.
I don't even know if it's in a theater near me, to be honest with you.
It's playing, especially in my area. We're talking about The Killer, by the way, for the audience. It's playing in like 4 theaters in DC, but they're all spread out at like Alamos.
3 in Chicago.
And there's no like push for it whatsoever. And I don't think Mank got a theatrical, so maybe they worked with Fincher and gave him a theatrical on this one. But if you remember was it last year, Knives Out, we all know that, Netflix specifically, you won't really see their movies in AMC's or Regals because there's that whole idea of the adjustment of like the theatrical window when it hits streaming. That's why you're going to see more Netflix films. Like I saw Roma at a Landmark or like, things like that. But Knives Out was a special release because
there's a Cinemark near us that hosts all of my Netflix screens.
Right. But the reason why you saw Knives Out too in AMC's was because that was a special deal that they made, obviously. But in this case with The Killer, it blows my mind that there's a new David Fincher film literally in theaters right now that none of us have seen. Now, we could have gone to screening, sure. I'm sure it conflicted with our schedules and things like that. But it's pretty wild to me that movie's just out there like randomly and nobody's talking about it.
It's not even that. It's just when you go to the streaming platform itself, like promote your shit. Like how would I even know if I wasn't looking for Pain Hustlers specifically? And I was just going on to the Netflix streaming service to go look for something to watch, and that doesn't come up. It just feels like once these movies hit, they get ignored. And I'm not just going to throw Netflix under the bus. I'm afraid it's the case with all of these streaming services. It feels like now you have to go with the title in mind, and it's becoming harder and harder.
I mean, dude, the fact that, and correct me, I saw the list recently of the top 10 biggest Netflix movies of all time, and they include movies like Extraction, Extraction 2, and Red Notice, maybe even Underground 6. But like, and I think, was it Tarantino recently that talked about the fact that like they have no impact on pop culture, and it's easy to hear those quotes and go, oh, he's just jealous because of this or that or that. But like, they don't. Like, who is genuinely talking about Red Notice? If it's one of the biggest movies in the history of Netflix. Hundreds of millions of hours watched, which means whether they watched it all the way through or not, a lot of people pressed play on it.
Right.
And when was the last time someone said to you, God, you know what I want to do on a Saturday afternoon? I want to put Red Notice on again.
Yeah.
Like it's just, and the thing is, and I liked Red Notice. I liked the Extraction films. I do, but I forget about them as quickly as I turn them on.
Do you think it has anything to do with the fact that there's no second life with a DVD, like with a hard copy release?
Well, there's multiple factors. There's no box office story for weeks, right? Which keeps the movie in the news. So like, even though The Killer is in theaters, it's not making anywhere near as much money even to top these stories of like top tens of box office. And, Oppenheimer and Barbie and all these big films, like we were tracking their box office. So it kept that name in the news every single week. And this is also why I prefer the model of Apple and Disney over Netflix in terms of releasing shows. Like when you have a gigantic show and you drop the whole thing on Netflix, and unless you're Stranger Things, no one's like, you watch it in a weekend and then no one talks about it unless it's like some crazy phenomenon like Tiger King or something like that. But Apple TV, and I'm not saying Apple TV and Disney are great at this, but they are week to week. And like Apple will put a couple episodes out, like that show Flight with was it Flight? What was the show
Hostage,
with
right?
Hijack?
Hijack.
I love Hijack.
We can't even
We're
get the
a
names
professional
right.
entertainment podcast.
No, with Hijack.
I loved Hijack.
With Idris Elba.
Yeah,
And
I loved Hijack.
my parents would text me every week at the end of the episode, essentially, and they'd be like, "Hey, we just watched this episode. I can't wait to see what's going to happen." And I remember I got all the episodes because I was interviewing Idris for it. And I remember just being on the edge of my seat every single time an episode would end. And I couldn't imagine. I'm like, this must be really fun for people at home because it keeps the show alive.
Sure.
So if you think about like my mom and dad, they'll watch it on a Sunday night, right? And then whatever the episode does, maybe Tuesday morning, like, hey, remember that scene? I wonder what's going to happen next week. And I just think that there's something to be said about, you're right. I think it's a shelf life thing. I mean, these massive productions like The Gray Man and Red Notice and Six Underground and even Pain Hustlers and Painkiller, Peter Berg show, like all this stuff just comes and goes and there's no discussion. There's nothing happening.
It comes and goes unless it's written and directed by Mike Flanagan, and then House of Usher is a fucking masterpiece.
But did Usher came out? And
I will say everyone at my it's a case, but like everyone at my job is talking about it. Everyone is like, like where are you? Which episode? Where, like don't talk about it. I'm only on episode. I have a lot of people in my circle who are watching House of Usher.
I honestly forgot Usher came out, and I love Flanagan. I'm obsessed with Flanagan.
Dude, press play on episode 1. It's phenomenal.
So as we figure our way through this model, right? Because all these studios and streamers are having this exact same conversation. About the right way to get these movies in front of people. I want to bring up Five Nights at Freddy's because it did domestically in its opening weekend $84 million.
This is as of today, Sean, so not just the weekend.
Oh,
so.
is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. It added another 52.6 million. So we are recording on Wednesday right now. The film has earned 136.7 million. And I know the budget was it 20 million or something like that?
Yeah, 20 million.
20 million, and it's earned 136.7.
Actually, clarifying, it's 149 million now.
Oh, geez.
Wow.
Okay,
Yeah.
terrific.
And shout out to the film's director who was only, I feel weird saying only, and $500,000, but only paid $500,000 for her work, but she got back-end points, and she is about to earn every single cent. So congrats to her, because I love when people bet on themselves.
And that's another thing that streaming is missing is the back end capabilities.
Sure.
Because the back end capabilities, if you're an actor and you're promoting a movie, I'm reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's book right now. It's called Be Useful. And he talked about this in his other book called Total Recall. But the most money he ever made in his whole career of any movie he did was Twins. And Twins was because it's a great story. Basically, him and Danny DeVito met with the studio head of Universal, gave up their front salary. I don't know if they made like a minimum, like a SAG minimum, whatever it was, but they gave up their front salary, and then they took a percentage on the back end. And it is the most money he said he's ever made in his entire career.
Good for him.
And again, think about that perspective though in promo. If you're Arnold and you know that back end is a big deal for you, you're going to go out and promote the heck out of that film.
Absolutely.
You're going to do every interview. You're going to make it the biggest splash possible. And again, I'm not projecting on Netflix or what these actors are doing, but if they're getting a $20 million payday up front to make a film, or a $30 million payday, and back end doesn't matter. I'm not saying that they're going to do press differently, but that does affect mindset a little bit. I mean, if you think about it, when someone's out there promoting a film, if you want it to do really, really, really well, or you're passionate about it, and you know that back end is possible, I do think that there's something to be said there about promotion.
Well, so why do we think that? Because the whole point is that Five Nights at Freddy's was also available on streaming. And okay, fine. It was Halloween weekend. People were looking for something scary to watch. I also understand that there's a generational interest in this, that like there's a younger audience that really did grow up with this video game and wanted to see it played out. But 140 something million dollars with it being available on streaming is pretty remarkable. So I
have a really interesting arc that what happened to me with this film. I haven't seen it, but about 4 or 5 weeks ago, one of the younger writers at my station, I think she just graduated, like literally like a year or so ago. So she's probably like 21, 22, I'm assuming. And she came up to me and she's like, hey, out of every movie coming out this year, the one I'm most excited about is Five Nights at Freddy's. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. At this moment, when she explained it to me, this was probably like, I don't know, like a month or two or so
Welcome
ago.
to feeling old.
I didn't know. And then I looked it up. I was like, oh, Jason Blum, this is great. And this is probably going to be a big movie, but I didn't know anything about it. So I started researching it, video game, whatever. Then I realized it's day and date. And so I remember going up to her like last week or week before the movie came out. And I said, how are you planning to see it? It's coming out on Peacock and theaters. She goes, oh, I'm going to the theater to see it. I'm like, oh, really? That's interesting. And I thought about generationally, like, it could have been so easy for her and her friends to get around the TV and just watch the movie in their home. But so she sent me a message the other day saying that she went to see it with her friends in a theater, and it was, and I'm like, that is amazing to think about somebody, on the younger side who had the streaming option. And that whole story arc for me was an eye-opening thing to learn. I'm like, wow. And then the movie comes out, has a huge box office weekend. And then I realized there's probably millions of other people who are just like her, who are dedicated, love this, and so it really is a fascinating phenomenon how well this film did. But then based on that story alone, you can kind of understand it.
Yeah, but I think it's still case by case, I think, though. Certain movies are gonna bring people out.
But this one had an audience.
Yeah.
I also wonder what it says. I think it's a perfect storm of release window and all of that. I also wonder what it says about Peacock, though. So Peacock is like 24 million subscribers versus, Netflix is like 240 million
subscribers. And they lost a lot recently, too, I think Peacock did.
I don't think it's as simple as that. I mean, it's also, I wonder what it says about Peacock, but also what it says about people's sort of like fatigue with like more subscriptions. Because I am a Peacock subscriber. They have the Premier League, and that's mostly what I watch there. But it's like $6 a month, I think.
Yeah.
And so you could probably get a trial if you haven't, but you could pay $6 and get this movie. But I wonder if people just don't, I wonder if there are people that are just like, I have my 5 or 6 subscriptions and I don't even want to bother with adding another one, or like, they're like, let's just go see it in a movie theater. Like, I'm curious what a general audience member's interaction is with Peacock, given this sort of perfect storm.
That's a good
time of year. And
it's also the horror genre. I mean, as we've seen out, and also PG-13, not that matters in horror because R-rated horror films crush anyways. But at the end of the day, like, I think we can all agree here, post-pandemic, one of the genres that really survived and has continued to flourish is horror. I mean, it is something. I mean, you have
the only consistent ones, honestly.
Yeah, but I mean, it really is amazing when you look at the Smile box office or you look at Black Phone's box office. People, and it's interesting to me because these are younger generations. I think I want to say I saw an article about the Five Nights at Freddy's audience. It was like so many people were under 35. I don't remember the exact percentage, but it was a large, massive chunk of the audience was under 35. And that was another thing we saw with the pandemic was younger people were continuing to go to the movies, but older audiences like my parents, they don't go. And so Five Nights at Freddy's is kind of that perfect storm. It's the horror genre, the younger audience, built-in audience from the video game. But you're right, the streaming aspect of it is really fascinating. I think Gabe is right. I think Peacock might not just have the translation like if it's on Netflix, people, that's everybody easy. Everybody has it.
Well, out of the people who are on the show, Jake, you're the only one who's seen it. So
really?
What prompted you to press play, or did you go to the theater to see it?
I didn't go to the theater. We had a little mini, my girlfriend and I, a little mini Halloween party here at the house for some family, and her brother came over and had already seen it. They'd already gone to the movies to see it. And he said, hey, did you see Five Nights at Freddy's? And I gotta be honest with you, this is the first moment in my life that at least I can remember where I consciously really had to pause and go, did I just miss the boat on this? Because I'm like Kevin, 4 or 5 weeks ago, I think I'd seen Five Nights at Freddy's talked about online. I think initially I thought like, wait, is this like a Freddy Krueger thing that I haven't heard? Like, I didn't really know what it was. I had some sort of a grasp that it was a video game and that it was being turned into a movie. But like the fact that I remember the initial box office estimates were between 30 and 50 million. And that's what made me pause and go, wait. What is this movie that's about to do 30 and 50 million? And so that's what made me I ended up doing a segment on my show where I interviewed a Columbia University video game design professor who was taking his class to the movie. And that's what even made me want to do a story in the first place. I was like, I got to acknowledge this movie in some form or fashion. But it's the first time in my life where I sort of went like, yeah, I know you're joking, Sean, but like kind of not like, am I getting older? Where like I'm really starting to not know what the kids are.
Well, and the main reason I'm even remotely familiar with it is because it was a popular game when my boys were growing up.
Sure.
I've never heard of the game until
not that either of them played it, but they at least knew what it was. So.
I've messed around with the game a little bit. It's very much sort of like it's just been around for a long time, but I want to ask you guys, how many Five Nights at Freddy's games do you think there are? Because I know we're kind of talking about it as like the game.
32.
No idea.
I want to say I know there's definitely at least 2 because people have talked about it. Is it 4?
Is it PlayStation or Xbox?
13. It's kind of on everything. Yeah. 13 different games. They're very kind of small, from what I understand, very kind of small experiences. It's not like they're 13, 50-hour games. But yeah, it's something that's been around. I don't even know when the first one came out, but it's just sort of been around. If you play video games, it's just been around for a long time. And I think they've been really good at maintaining interest through the horror genre. Like horror has a like low barrier to entry of like, I want to be scared. It's spooky season. You go find a thing that everyone's talking about, and you don't have to be a sci-fi movie fan. You don't have to be a romance movie fan. You don't have to be it's just kind of, you're looking for that thrill. And I think that brand has just been good about just staying in the mix. On top of, I think Blumhouse is also very smart to know that moviegoers are interested in horror, no matter what it is. And so it's this like perfect marriage of, we're going to get an audience from this franchise, but also we know that if we can put something interesting out, that is the horror genre, it's going to do well.
I think there's also something to be said that something like The Exorcist, which is legacy horror, one of the most prestige names in that genre, comes out and does next to nothing.
Right.
A pretty high profile release.
I still maintain that. Sorry.
No, please.
I still maintain that that's really not a franchise in the eye of people, just because The Exorcist versus any other exorcism movie has all been muddled, I think, to the general audience of
it's the same way of like, there's a reason they don't keep making Jaws movies. Like there's Jaws and then there's the rest of them. Like maybe The Exorcist just needs to be The Exorcist.
They killed that brand. They destroyed that brand.
But they've got to make, look, box office wise to budget, it actually performed perfectly fine, adequately for a horror film. It's the fact that they paid $400 million for the franchise that makes them go, we gotta make.
Is all they got out of that was 3 movies? Is that it?
They're supposed to be, it's supposed to be a trilogy, because the next one's supposed to be The Exorcist Deceiver.
I'm curious if it comes with like something else. Like, do you get some sort of merchandise on your movies? Like, what do you get?
What merch are you gonna sell? I think you get everything.
I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out why you thought 3 movies would make that much money. But
and then the third one is going to be an Air Bud spinoff, where it's going to be Exorcist Retriever.
Nice.
I would love to see that. I still, we still
horrifying him. In your pitch, is Air Bud possessed?
No, Air Bud is The Exorcist.
Good. Okay,
right.
That's good. That's good. I was worried for a minute there.
No,
the whole family can get involved.
No, and really quick, I would say
the power of treats compel you.
I was trying to come up with a good line.
The paw of Christ compels you. The paw of Christ compels you.
So wait, Five Nights at Freddy's, 28% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, 88% audience score. So, which is correct, Jake?
It's not good. It's not good. I have absolutely no emotional connection to this. I've been told that there are Easter eggs hidden in there and certain characters pop up that make everyone go, but I stand by it. Those things are great. And I'm glad that they make people happy, but the movie has to work with no knowledge of those sort of things whatsoever. It's not particularly well made. The script is very sort of basic. It basically follows a security guard who gets a night gig at what is essentially kind of like a Chuck E. Cheese type pizza place, and the animatronics come to life at night and kill people. It's the best thing that I can say about this movie is that while it doesn't work for me, I love horror. I thought it was a very sort of muted, boring, bland, generic horror film. If it serves as a gateway horror film for younger audiences, that would make me really happy, because I'd like to think, sure, you think about the horror films that I love. It's a little too PG-13 for not that. Let me retract that, because there's great PG-13 horror films. It's just a little bit too meh for me.
Safe.
Yeah, safe's a much better word. But if you're 10 years old and you love the game and this movie works for you, and because of this movie, you crack open the horror section on Peacock, and then you go over to the horror section on HBO Max or the horror section on Netflix and start trying different things out. Yeah. Which is something I think could legitimately happen. Sure. That makes me really happy. So
I recommend Suspiria by Luca.
That's the next logical step.
When you turn 11, get the Suspiria.
I do want to just mention real quick, because I haven't seen Five Nights at Freddy's, but I'm very intrigued by the practical effects, because I know the Jim Henson Creature Shop, I believe, was involved in the production of the animatronics and the creatures. That fascinates me, and again, I think that's probably that's something that I would just be intrigued by, just to watch some, practical animatronic effects. And I'm actually really interested in learning more about the Jim Henson Creature Shop as well, and because I know that I read interviews with the director talking about how that was involved, and I wonder what else they're involved in terms of horror filmmaking. It's an interesting thing.
I don't know. Well, we will find out how this movie continues to hold, particularly being available on streaming. And in the meantime, we're going to switch on over to Sophia Coppola's new film, which is platforming, I believe. I'm not quite sure how the rollout strategy of this one is.
It's opening pretty wide in Chicago.
Is it really?
I think it's wide. I think this week is wide.
It's so interesting. There are these, a slate of films that make the festival circuit, and then it's hard to keep track of when they start to come out to other markets. Okay, Gabe is saying that it's going wide. Priscilla tells the story of, obviously, Priscilla Presley, and tells the relationship that she has with Elvis through Priscilla's eyes specifically, and is, I think, a really fascinating study of being in the orbit of someone who is incredibly famous, but serving a different role than I think we've seen in a lot of other biopics about famous singers or famous artists, because the way that Sophia Coppola decides to approach this is to, and I wonder how accurate this is, although it's based on Priscilla Presley's own book about her life, so I have to assume that it's pretty accurate in terms of the experiences that she had.
Didn't she executive produce it, Jake?
I think
she was
executive producer, and it's based on her book.
So there's a separation between Elvis's professional life and his home life, and he wanted very strongly to maintain that line as much as he could, which made life very difficult for Priscilla. She essentially was banished to Graceland. And, I say banished, she had every, resource available to her there that she could want or need, but it just came with a crippling loneliness, because she never really knew when Elvis was going to be coming home. He would be out in Los Angeles filming movies. He would be on tour. And then one of the things I think the movie really captures beautifully is how there's a circus that surrounds Elvis. And when he comes back home, it consumes everything. It's like a hurricane that comes into Graceland, and it's Elvis and all of his hangers on. And for a minute, like, Priscilla feels like she's part of it, but the world is still so alien to her. And I don't remember really seeing another, almost all of these biopics we watch are from the eyes of the artist. It's rare to see it from somebody who's on the outside kind of looking in, and how that brush with fame every once in a while makes them feel. And I thought it had a tremendous ending, which I'll leave for everybody else to discover. I was blown away by the performers in this. I thought that, help me out with the actress's first name, Kaylee Spiney. Kaylee Spiney, is that how it's pronounced? She was outstanding in the film. I just thought she was incredible. I've seen her in a few other movies up to this point. I've never really seen her as a lead. And I thought she walked away with the entire movie. I wouldn't be surprised if she got some type of an Oscar nomination if the movie catches on. I thought it was kind of like Coppola's most subtle film. I wasn't quite like it wasn't very flashy. It wasn't very showy. I didn't think it had huge things to say about celebrity culture. I was waiting for a little bit more analysis of it, but while I was watching it, I was thoroughly entertained by the performances and another look into Elvis's life that, again, so different from what Baz Luhrmann just gave us. And even though that was kind of seen through the eyes of Colonel Tom Parker, but showed the more flashy, gaudy, stage presence driven side of Elvis, I thought this was a really intimate look at the kind of life that he had with Priscilla, that the two of them lived together. Kev, what were your thoughts on this film and how it played out?
Yeah, I think intimate is the perfect word for it. I mean, it's like you're a fly on the wall in very private moments of one of the most famous, two of the most famous people on the planet, and I think it's an interesting look. And like you said, the difference between that and Baz Luhrmann's film are, that's what's so great about filmmaking, right? I mean, you look, these are different stories, of course, but, Priscilla was 14 when she met Elvis. He was 24. And one of the interesting things about watching this film is watching Priscilla's parents try to understand what's going on and allowing their daughter to go off with Elvis. And it's a really interesting thing to watch. And I think Sophia Coppola does an interesting job of building this concept of Priscilla being an older soul. Is somebody, she definitely, I would argue, by watching the movie, felt like she had an older soul to her. And I found their chemistry to be very interesting. Jacob Elordi, obviously you know him most from Euphoria, a really talented, incredible actor, huge film fan, loves, and just based on what I've seen from interviews of his, he's really big into filmmaking and just loves film and movie making. And it's one of the things that's really interesting about this film is I remember asking him at the press junket was there's a lot of different moments where they show covers of records and covers of photos of like classic things that Elvis had done. And Jacob had to go and take all those photos and do all of those records. And he did them in character, which I thought was an interesting thing. I mean, again, like it makes sense he would do it in character, but a day or two they would just take all these photos and he would be in full character doing the exact pose that Elvis did on this record or that record. The production value was incredible, but it's also a very small, intimate film. It's very, it's not a lot of stage presence moments. It's really just
no music. None of Elvis's music, no big stage shows, which you might expect.
Yeah, they didn't
because it wasn't allowed. The Elvis estate prevented them from doing it.
Oh, no kidding! Really? Is that the reason? Oh, interesting.
Right.
Interesting.
Which is what is it? Anachronistic is the word, Jake? The music.
Yes.
Okay. And so the music was written around that, but yeah, they didn't use, from what I understand, you couldn't use any of the classic Elvis, which I actually thought was a really interesting way to do it because. Yeah, why would you hear his music while we're in these moments where we're just in his bedroom? I mean, it's possible someone could have played it on the radio, but even down to the moments where they'll just mention the Colonel. Like, oh, the Colonel's on the phone. And
there's only one or two mentions of Tom Parker.
But wait, does Elvis's estate, did they back the Baz Luhrmann? They
very much so.
Yeah, they must have.
Now, no, remember, and yeah, they did, but I don't. From what I remember, and I could be wrong, we were all at Graceland because that's where we did our interview with Tom Hanks for the film.
Which shows me that they backed.
But from what I understood from that, especially when the film was being introduced, they weren't involved at all in the making of the movie and had no ties to it in that regard. The movie was then sent to Priscilla and Lisa Marie, and I think they watched it, loved it, and then decided to come out and help promote and back the film.
Sounds right.
I think he did say. Well, I think he did say that they allowed him in to do the research and when he writing and creating like they said he was around a lot. I don't know. I can't say exactly when they would say they signed off on it or didn't, but I think he was very much involved with the family while he was developing it and at least giving him access to materials and archives and stuff.
Yeah, it just sounded like, I remember for some reason it sounded like they just like they were involved. They saw the film and then they wanted to support it because they loved it so much and thought, because didn't Priscilla or Lisa Marie or someone was on stage saying that they felt Elvis's presence coming through Austin Butler's performance.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a very different performance. Obviously, I think Jacob's performance is incredible. Kaylee is amazing as Priscilla. There's a lot of internal performance happening with her, and I genuinely believe they do a really good job, because the whole time you're watching it, you're thinking to yourself, how can these parents let this 14-year-old girl go off with Elvis?
They do a pretty good job of at least establishing, because Elvis was in the military at the time.
They do,
and Priscilla's father was in the military, and they had that link. You're right. The age difference is significant. It happened, it's a legitimate thing that happened. So you can't really gloss over it.
But she handles it well. I thought that Sophia did a good job, because every time you're watching a movie and you're having a moral question in your mind, I love when a film is already a step ahead of you. Like, I'll have a question and then a minute later it'll be answered on screen, because she knows. Sophia Coppola is such a phenomenal filmmaker. And shout out to The Bling Ring if you haven't seen that, one of her best movies. Marie Antoinette, obviously Lost in Translation, The Beguiled, great director. But I do find it interesting that that is a very interesting push-pull as an audience member, because you go,
sure,
that's really strange that she's 14. And so so Sophia handles that really well, I thought.
Jiggy, where'd you land on this one?
It didn't work for me, to be honest with you. I felt like it didn't really have anything to say that I didn't already assume was the case going into it.
Okay.
I think when people hear about, this movie about their relationship told from Priscilla's perspective, there is this expectation that there is going to be some sort of shocking revelation that we haven't heard of leading up to this point. And I got to be honest with you, everything that is presented in the film that happened between them, either I kind of already knew, or quite frankly, just assumed that was the case. Look, there are a lot of things that weren't great about their relationship, but I also think either it's one of two cases, because here's the thing. Elvis has been gone for the better part of half a century. I don't think she is out to do anything to tarnish the man's legacy, whether it be through her book or through her participation in this film. So I don't think, her participation, she's not going to put all of this salacious, horrible, terrible thing there. She's not going to put all that out there about him right now. So all of the things that are presented that were wrong about their relationship, it felt either A, it wasn't quite that bad, or it was worse than the movie is letting on, and she's just not willing to tell us the full truth. What I mean by that is it implies that he had
her story too, right? I mean, she has every right to protect herself, or
but then it's for an example, it showed that he had a temper. He would throw a chair against the wall, but by no means does it imply that he was ever physical with her. He would go off and shoot films, and he cheated.
Yeah.
And he got her, he got her hooked on these pills, but it also seemed like she never really was super hooked on them. The movie never really goes into just how much. It seemed like she enjoyed what they did and maybe took advantage of them, but it never really dives into that. So I felt like there were a lot of aspects of the film that it would tip its toe into and then never really go any further, either because there was no further to go or because it was afraid to go there. And even, the big point of conversation being the age difference. She was 14 when they met. He was 24. In Baz Luhrmann's film, I think it comes down to a single line in the movie where they say something about him being 10 years older, but they never talk about what the age difference is. Even in this film, I felt like it was touched on in the beginning. The age difference, and there at one point in the film they walk into a room together and someone in the room says, "Oh, she's a child," or something like that, and then it lets it go, and then it just sort of moves on.
Can I push back, because and I won't, this is not a spoiler, but see, I think the age is present throughout the whole movie, because the whole story, and for this, basically when she goes to kind of live with Elvis, she's finishing high school, and there's this whole part of the storyline where Elvis is basically checking on her to make sure she's doing her schoolwork, and then she has to do this and this. I felt like I was always constantly reminded that she was a teenager. But I mean, but to Jake's point, there are a lot of things they do hit on. You're right, that they just kind of throughout, and then but the age, I always felt her age, but the movie doesn't. The movie does take place over
a period of time.
It's over a period of time.
Over 10 years.
And she has stood by the fact that while they met when she was very young, that and this is sort of touched on in the film, that they weren't really truly physical together until she was substantially older.
Yeah, they have literal scenes in the film where like he'll
won't
stop.
sleep with her.
Yeah.
But I thought the film was fine, but I sort of walked out going like, was that it? Was that the big story that like everyone is waiting to be told? Because I kind of just, it didn't really. And I feel like you said this earlier, Sean. It didn't really have anything to say.
Well,
see,
and I'll add this much.
I felt like I was just in the moment with them. I kind of just liked living in that story. Not that I walked away with any profound answers. I just thought it was fascinating to sit in a room with Elvis and Priscilla and just watch them on a day-to-day basis doing normal things. Like, I think to me that was the appeal, was seeing Elvis in this home life almost, in this like they're so far removed from the stardom. But then Sophia just drops in these little things about like, oh, he's going on tour. Like Jake said, like he'll be in the newspaper for filming a movie and possibly having an affair. Like, I kind of like that Sophia was like playing with those things, but never kind of like saturated the film with the stardom.
But the difference, and I think I a little bit get what Jake is trying to say with this, because this is one thing I thought was missing from it. I would think that Sophia Coppola would have a lot of commentary of being around famous people, as you grow up kind of thing. And I wanted her to bring a little bit more of the ramifications of that. I think it's talked about in the movie, with what Priscilla's going through. But I think that Sophia Coppola, if she's going to take on this story, would have some really interesting things to say about that. And I'm not quite sure that they made it into the film. So I don't know if that was her intention then, but I think I thought going into it, oh boy, if Sophia Coppola is going to take the time to tell Priscilla Presley's story, she probably has some kind of a hook into it. And maybe I expected something different from it.
Well, I think the hook is that it is this intimate story. I think it's like we already got the Baz Luhrmann explosive, performance, music, everything, which is really interesting. Kind of going back to our discussion we just had. If Priscilla's involved, I don't know who owns Elvis's music, but they were obviously able to use Elvis's music in Luhrmann's film. I don't believe Priscilla was a producer on the film. I need to double check that. But as a producer on this movie, it is fascinating. So I don't know where his music is within rights. But for Priscilla to be involved in the film and then still not be able to use the Elvis music is actually an interesting aspect to me.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of music, I want to really quickly, before we get out of here today, mention something that hit Disney Plus the day that we're recording, which is a 12-minute short film that actually gave me goosebumps listening to it. It's called Now and Then, the last Beatles song, and it stems from Peter Jackson's work on the Beatles Get Back multi-episode documentary. Have you guys heard about this Now and Then at all?
Yep.
It's incredible what they were able to do. It's the two remaining Beatles,
Ringo
Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, and they talk about the fact that in 1990 they tried to get together while George Harrison was still alive and use a tape recording of John Lennon on a song that he was kind of banging out, and got all the way through. That's largely piano and him singing. But at the time didn't have the tools to isolate John's vocals over the piano. A lot of times the piano was sort of overpowering his vocals. And you listen to a lot of this grainy tape of how they're trying to put it at the Beatles in the 1990s were trying to figure out what they could do with it. And then George Harrison passes away. So they kind of put it aside, like, all right, well, that's it. We're not going to be able to figure this out. And now they jump forward to 2023 and Peter Jackson and all of his technology is able to isolate. He has now the tools to completely isolate the sounds on the tape. And Amazing. They play John Lennon's vocals. And all the hairs on my body
as a single
stood
track?
up. As an isolated single track. They have amplified and cleaned up John Lennon's vocals. And so then Paul and Ringo were able to add new instruments to it and essentially complete what they're calling the last Beatles song. It's incredible. If you have any kind of passing interest in the Beatles or even just how musical production is made, I get pretty geeked out about stuff like that. It's terrific. And it's 12 minutes. It's on Disney Plus. It's terrific. All right. We would be remiss if we didn't take a few minutes just to discuss the loss of Matthew Perry, who died on Saturday evening. A lot of coverage about that still. But personally, I wanted all of us to sort of weigh in because I thought that, he's a significant comedic presence from our child, as we were growing up, our formative years, without question, friends. But, his film work as well, too. Jake and I were texting about the fact that we got him for 17 again, which
17 again.
I don't even know what year that was. Do you have any idea?
2009.
2009.
Love that movie.
That's great. It's a great movie.
That's a really good movie.
Is that Leslie Mann?
Yeah. Yes. And Zac Efron.
Love that movie.
And Thomas Lennon.
That sounds right. Did he direct it? Thomas Lennon directed it?
I'm not sure, but Thomas Lennon was the guy from Reno 911 who was sort of his friend. He's good.
I went down a rabbit hole.
Directed by Burr Steers.
Oh yeah, sure, Burr Steers. I went down a rabbit hole of Matthew Perry performances when I was doing the Bruce book because they were in Whole 9 Yards together, and then the completely atrocious Whole 10 Yards. And I read Matthew Perry's memoir that came out just recently, and he has a whole chapter in there about the amount of time that he spent with Bruce while they were filming those movies. And he completely admits that like the sequel is a disaster and they never should have made it and all this jazz. But I came to better appreciate his comedic timing. The way that he changed the pattern of comedic dialogue, the pauses that he put in, the way he knew when to drop, his punchlines. I argue that there's a whole string of people who talk the way that Chandler did because of what he did with that character. And so, he wasn't the most successful friend to break out into movies, but was probably second. I think he's probably second to Aniston. And I think probably had several, good years left in him. I know people watched, what was the Aaron Sorkin one that he did?
Sunset Strip.
Yeah, I know he was good in that as well too. So yeah, I don't know. This one was a shock. How did you guys feel when you heard the news?
Well, there was something that I wanted to point out, and I don't remember the name of the podcast he went on, but it was in November of last year. I think he was promoting his memoir, and he talked about how he, and I'm going to paraphrase him, so this is not exact quotes, but he didn't want to be remembered just for Friends, or that the first thing that's mentioned when he passes away, he didn't want it to be Friends.
We aired that clip. Because whenever my producer was building the segment, she started with a clip of Friends, and I said, "Hey, there's this clip of him on stage saying, when I die, I don't want the first thing to be mentioned to be Friends." So I said, like, how many times do you have someone on video saying that? I was like, so like out of respect to him, we can't start the segment with a Friends clip. We can't.
And I was pretty. And when I was on the air that day, the day I think it was Monday after because we were covering it.
He passed Saturday.
I was very adamant, and every time I did a hit, that I said that he said this because he even I think the quote even goes on to say I'm paraphrasing, but he was going to work the rest of his life basically to prove that that's not the first thing that you should mention about me when I pass. Essentially,
that's interesting.
But to give it more context, he's talking about the work he was doing with sobriety and helping people. That's what he was most passionate about. And the thing that it sounded like that was what he wanted his legacy to be, which was if someone comes to him and asks for help, that he would offer that. And I think, his sobriety journey, which is talked about a lot, I'm assuming in his book. I haven't read his book. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and he narrates his own audiobook. And it's funny, I've gotten into a whole audiobook phase. I'm going to do the Michelle Williams, who just narrated Britney Spears' book and all these things. And Jada Pinkett Smith just narrated her book. But to hear, it would be really, really interesting to listen to Matthew Perry's book now, just specifically on the other side of this, because
a little sadder.
I also think, but also context wise, like to think about if he was that, in November of last year, if he said that, if he knew that that's what I want to be remembered for, and then for him to pass a year later, essentially. Yeah. And then so now I'm very interested in reading his book, not just because he passed, but primarily because of the way we shape people in the media. And, when someone passes, what that headline reads, right? Like, and, so to me, it's just interesting. And I wanted to point out that he did a lot of work with that. And that was a really big part of his life. And it sounded like, not to put words in his mouth, it sounded like that was the thing he was most proud of, was giving advice and helping people with their own sobriety and their own life issues.
I will be very proud to be known for Real Blend in my obituary. If that's the very first thing that people discuss.
Yeah, you're getting Snyder Cut author.
Shit, you're probably right. Jakey, anything?
Yeah, it's funny. I was trying to think back to I only interviewed him one time. And it was years, it was so far back that it was before I was putting any of my stuff on YouTube. Like I don't even have the video anymore, which is a real shame. I remember him being incredibly charming and very kind. And I remember him being sort of as a fan of Friends, as was everyone. I remember him sort of being the exact person that I wanted him to be. Not quite Chandler Bing, but just enough of that charm in there where you see that where Chandler Bing came from. And I remember him being very kind. And yeah, I think the most tragic part of this, the sort of the sinking feeling I had whenever I found out the news on Saturday night, was that it really felt like he had turned a corner. It really felt like he was moving in the right direction. The creator of Friends just said in an interview that she just spoke to him 2 weeks ago and that he was in a really good place. And that makes his passing all the more unfair, and that it felt like he was moving in the right direction. And like Kevin said, was making it his life mission to help people who were in the same position as him. And so I, as much as we all love Friends and love Chandler, I am with Kevin, and that he made it incredibly clear that when he died, he wanted to be known for helping people, and for when someone came to him and said, "Hey, I'm having struggles with alcohol addiction," and he said, he could tell them, I understand that. Let me help you. And you know what? I think that's a hell of a thing to be known for. And if that's the thing he wants to be known for, I will forever mention that long before I'll ever mention Chandler Bing.
I do want to mention something as well, just because I don't know how much I've mentioned this on the show before, but Matthew Perry in particular, but Friends in particular, is extremely important to me and extremely important to my childhood. So I since we do the podcast, I'd love to tell that story.
Sure.
Which is growing up, we moved a lot. I'm one of those kids that moved through most of grade school all the way up to high school. I was basically at a new town or a new school like every year. And other than my immediate family, our stability was, the stability I had was our VHS collection and our DVD collection. That's kind of where the love for all of this started. But the one thing that we all had in common was loving Friends. So no matter if I lived in Georgia or I lived on a different side of this state or there, we always had Friends. And so for me,
it's your home. Friends is your home.
I didn't really unpack it until later in life, but very much like those sets, those characters, those episodes were, as a kid, stability, which I think is important. So even though we were moving, it was very much a safe place for me. And again, I didn't really understand that till later. I can't tell you, I know everyone loves Friends. It's the biggest show ever, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen them. I mean, they were just a part of our life of just having them on, putting them on and just listening to them, anything like that. And Matthew Perry in particular, and his character, but also his roles outside of that, while he was, his movie roles outside of that, his sense of humor is very much a part of my sense of humor, in a huge, huge way. Like what I find funny comes from learning how funny he was. So it's a tragic loss. My whole family we had like a text thread going, and we were like, kind of mourning him because it was a big loss for all of us. So
he was so young. He's 54.
Too young.
54.
Too young.
I mean, Sean, you turned 54 like about 10 years ago, right?
10 years ago. So I've been doing pretty good. No, but you know what's going to happen is that like we're going to get to this age now where like people who were extremely important to us growing up are going to start passing. It's going to be that generation, and so
it's a reminder. I know it's a cliche, but it's a reminder to tell the people that you love them, and if there's somebody there that you appreciate, it's tell them you appreciate them. We put a lot of put a lot of hate and cynicism on the internet, but maybe reach out to, even if they're rich and famous or whatever, you never know. Just if you feel passionate about something in a positive way, vocalize that if you can.
And I think about the ending of Babylon a lot, or that scene in Babylon where Brad Pitt is talking with who's the
Gene Smart. Smart
about someone generations later is going to turn on your movie and meet you, right? And I always say when someone passes that they're never really gone, because they're what they've left on this earth is their legacy through the motion picture and television shows, but also obviously the work that Matthew was doing with sobriety and helping people. But you think 10, 15 years from now, someone pops on Friends for the first time and they find joy from Matthew's performance. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's still alive in that way. He's still delivering and healing and helping. Laughing is a huge thing that helps so many people. It's so simple, but it does. It's one of the best. What was it? Laughter is the best medicine. So I just think it's interesting that while he's gone physically, he will continue generationally to assist people with entertainment and his sobriety stories.
And it's sounds silly. It might sound superficial, but I'm actually glad that they all did that reunion that aired recently.
Yeah.
Because that group put off for the longest time, getting back together and doing the Friends reunion. I think because they understood the impact of it. And they obviously, if they lost Matthew Perry, I doubt would ever have done it, because it just wouldn't have the same impact. And so the fact that he got to experience that, the fact that he got to do what, Gabe's mentioning, the significance of the sets. One of my favorite parts about that reunion is when they just go back onto the sets, and it instantly conjures all these memories of behind the scenes stuff to them, certain actors writing jokes, down on the table, or, all these other memories that were triggered by, sense memory. I found all that to be really, really fascinating.
And the stories that are coming out about him. There was a story I read today about John Stamos when he did a cameo on the show. I've seen Friends in bits and pieces. I've never watched the whole series.
Oh, you should. You should start from the beginning and go all the way through.
I want to. And when I was growing up, I was always a Seinfeld guy. I know they aired back to back, but Seinfeld was my show. But I think there was a Stamos.
Mine was the Honeymooners,
right? but
Sean's were just cave paintings. Actually,
I'm paraphrasing this, but I think Stamos was on the show, and I think he came out and bombed or something, and Matthew Perry helped him and helped the audience give him confidence to continue. I'll find the story, but if you haven't, just look up John Stamos, Matthew Perry. It's a really cool story. It just again speaks to his character, I think, in an interesting way.
So head to the comments down below under the episode and let us know your favorite Matthew Perry project. And if it happens to be Friends, then let us know what your favorite sort of Chandler moment or joke might be. And let's remember the actor for all that he accomplished. In the meantime, we'll be back next week with a brand new episode. You can follow us on social media at Jake's Takes, at Kevin McCarthy TV, at Sean_O'Connell, at Gabe Kovach. And the show, as always, is at Real Blend. Because this damn strike won't end, we will continue to say, Hollywood, please God, pay your actors.